is going to be a little bit delayed. Come on. There we go. Cool. Good. Let's go ahead and turn that off. Cool. All right. Before we get started, as a reminder, the paper is due next Wednesday. Especially for my online people, because I'm going to get a lot of emails like, Tuesday night, what's the paper on? It's on the syllabus. So, do that. Um, um, yeah, so, papers next Wednesday, and then we'll have the week after that off. I'll try and get everything graded, but I've got I got more online students than I realized I did. I mean, I thought I had a lot, but I didn't realize that my 102 classes are full online, so that's like 60 online students, in addition to my in-person students. So, any questions from you guys before we start? Okay. Well, let's get back into where we were. Actually, before we do, had a student, so you guys know, because, well, I assume you guys at least occasionally check Blackboard. Y'all don't have to do the discussion stuff. That's for my online students. But I did have a student mention that what they, because my discussion is usually like, what stuck out to you in the last week for the notes, which is just mostly for like attendance for my online students. And one student mentioned that what was interesting to them is, like, after all the stuff of the French Revolution, which was essentially getting rid of a king, that it got so chaotic that they let Napoleon become emperor, like, uproarious applause. Yes, you can become emperor. We're totally cool with that. Get us out of this chaos. Recently a quote from Napoleon came up, and I actually looked it up to get the Napoleon quote. He who saves his fatherland can commit no crime. Watch out for people becoming emperors. Just FYI. So Napoleon thought himself above the law, and plunged Europe into like 10 years of war. Just saying. And we've got this entire chapter on Europe trying to figure out what to do after Napoleon. So, Anyway, I just wanted to go back to that since Napoleon came up recently. And then I had that student mention the whole, like, French Revolution was about getting rid of a king, and then they, like, brought Napoleon up as an emperor. It's like, yeah, that's a good point. I should mention that. And I actually had another student, also in this class, on my online class, mention the Netherlands during the Enlightenment as like a melting pot, because they let in all the exiles from the other countries, which was interesting because in my American history class we were talking about America as a melting pot. So that was cool, despite them not being in my American history class. It's like, it's neat that you say that, because that's also true, because them accepting a bunch of exiles is was allowing the Netherlands to become this really powerful country during the Enlightenment, because they were a sort of melting pot, and that's what actually let America become so powerful for a time, um, was the whole melting pot thing of like letting everybody in and accepting these different ideas from all over the world. Anyway, so yeah, just to remind my online students, please do the discussion day. It's not just me going through and checking to see who actually looked at it. I do read all your stuff, and I really like to see what sticks out to you guys, and especially when you bring forth your own ideas of what stuck out and what you think about, because it's cool. I mean, if you guys ever want to just like poke in there, that's cool too, but you're not at all required. Anyway, right, back to this. So we mentioned the failed nationalistic projects. Italy under Mazzini. Mazzini somehow managed to not get killed, which again is about as impressive as Saez. Germany had the Brothers Grimm, who went through all the various German states and were like, hey, we've got like all the same sort of traditions and ideas, despite us being a bunch of little separate states. And apparently that was too much, and they got fired from their professorship jobs. And then in Poland, they had a revolt, and there was a Russo-Polish war, and the Poles got absolutely destroyed by Russia. Because Poland never gets a happy ending. Which again, I'm just saying, like, I'm not trying to be the catastrophist, but anytime Russia gets aggressive, Poland suffers. I'm just saying. And Ukraine is their buffer zone, and if Ukraine goes down, Poland's next, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Anyway, so back to what the various countries were up to. So France had another freaking revolution, sort of. So Charles X, who came after Louis the 18th. So we've got a different name in France now. Thank God, we've got a Charles. He's the 10th though, so we've had a lot of Charleses before him. There's a long line of French kings. Anyway, he was too conservative. The liberals revolted after the July Ordinances of 1830, which would have limited voting rights to the 20,000 richest Frenchmen. Yeah, the French don't appreciate when you decide to take their rights away. I mean, they don't like it when you. They just don't like it. They don't like you messing with any of their stuff. There was demonstrations in Paris. They got Louis Philippe of the House of Orleans on the throne. But when the workers protested, he called out the army. So Louis Philippe is on the throne now. It's still sort of a monarchy. We'll get back to Louis Philippe. This was that image I showed you guys before with the guy standing up on the rubble holding the flag. I think I might have that image again. It's in the book, which I know very few of you probably have the book because it's gone out of print now. Thanks, McGraw-Hill. England! So there was almost a revolution. Great Reform Act of 1832. More of the population was given the right to vote, which is to say the male population, because again, this was 1800. The House of Commons was more representative of the general population. Radicals wanted more reform. They felt like when Elizabeth, wrong queen. Less good queen, but still Victoria wasn't nothing. She came to power in 1837. She was like 18. She came to power in 1837. They figured basically this girl comes to power. She's going to be weak. She's going to just give up and let us do what we want. They were charterists. They pushed for universal suffrage, which, I mean, That's not a bad thing. Universal suffrage is certainly not a bad thing. Um, However, the middle class did not join them, and if the middle class doesn't join the revolution, you don't have a revolution. Um, I said before, like, the army needs to join the revolution for a revolution to win, but if you don't even have, like, the numbers of regular people for a revolution, you don't even have, like, a demonstration in the streets. So yeah, this never, it didn't even, like, they barely even had anybody out in the streets yelling about it. But there was reform, and that's what the subheading in the book is: reform without revolutions. They had reform, stuff changed in England, but there wasn't like the violence of, for example, France. Um, England, despite it being England, oftentimes does pretty okay, unless you're in Ireland. Meanwhile, in Russia, there was the Decembrist uprising. Some army officers tried to revolt against Nicholas I. However, because it's Russia, he heard about it, and his loyal officers got rid of the disloyal officers. And since it's Russia, it probably wasn't pretty. So he became extremely paranoid about any liberal plots, and basically cracked down on anything even like middle of the road liberal. So yeah, this was going the opposite direction from like the modernism that or modernization that Peter the Great attempted, which is going to be a trend for Russia. So here is the revolution in France. Once again, this is going to be a trend of they block roadways. They block roadways, they make barricades, and in this case, they pulled up the freaking paving stones and made the barricade out of the paving stones. Like, that's not just, you're making a really good barricade because it's stones. B, you're making also a trench because you're pulling up the paving stones. But also C, you're making a mess. You're pulling up the paving stones. So once it's done, they've got to put the paving stones back down. They've got to replace the dirt, and the paving stones are probably all busted now, and they've got to get new ones. Yeah. This is a mess, is what they're doing here. So it's great. There's Victoria. Again, she came to power at like 18. She was very young. There's the Decembrist uprising. This is actually a picture in the book. This is surprisingly, I got the colored the photograph, not photograph, the color picture. Then the book is black and white for some reason. Yes, the same photo, the same picture. Failed Decembrist revolt in Russia. High-ranking Russian officials tried to prevent the ascension of the arch-conservative Prince Nicholas to the throne. Their plot was discovered. Nicholas called out the guards, loyal to himself, to arrest and execute the reform-minded officers. Yeah. Also, just as an aside, when I went to grad school, I could graduate in one of two ways. One, I could write a dissertation, which is basically a small book, or I could take an oral comprehensive exam where I sit down in front of 3 of the professors that I took the most classes from, and they would grill me for like 30 minutes. I decided to go with the latter. And one of the questions that I missed that I will never forget was this one. I couldn't remember the Decembrist uprising. So now I will never forget it because it scarred me. So don't forget the Decembrist uprising. It's going to be on your test. I'm psychologically scarred, so you will be too. Yeah, the Decembrist uprising is on the test. Anyway. So romanticism. It's not what it sounds like. It was this idea of clinging to the past, but acknowledging that change was sweeping it away. It's depressing, is what it is. Um, it's this idea that the past was great, but it's all going away. It's like nostalgia, essentially. It's like, oh yeah, the past was great, but the future's changing. Um, Art is a really good. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. Um, Literature, often expressed in poetry, focused on suffering, particularly emotional, sacrifice of oneself for knowledge, chasing after a loved one, ending in tragedy. Like I said, it's not a happy artistic expression. Art and music. Art typically dealt with the passage of time. Ruins were very popular. Um, I hope I've got a good picture in here. There's a really great picture in the book of like, yeah, by the German artist Caspar David Friedrich. A well-dressed solitary man contemplates the sunset from a perch inside a ruined Gothic church. So he's like he's inside the stained glass window. The glass is gone. He's inside like the arch of the window, just sort of like sitting, and beyond it is trees, and like the church itself is covered in greenery, like the vines and stuff are growing inside it, and beyond it is the sunset. It's very pretty, but also kind of depressing because the church itself is overgrown and is in ruins. Um, it's aesthetically very pretty, but also at the same time kind of depressing because it's in ruins. Um, Music is very telling. Let's see, you've got Beethoven, Franz Liszt, Carl Maria von Weber, um, very discordant, court music to operas, and the direction of operas, which I think we'll get more into a little bit later. Excuse me. Yeah, they drew on folklore or national epic poetry. Um, in some cases, composers snuck liberal or nationalistic themes to their pieces, inspiring audiences to denounce the authorities or even to riot. This won't be the last time we talk about audiences losing their minds over an opera. Chorus sung by Hebrew slaves in Giuseppe Verdi's Nabucco was widely interpreted as a call for Italian nationalists to overthrow Austrian oppression. The motto, Viva Verdi, was used not only to praise the anti-clerical liberal nationalist composer, but also to demonstrate support for the unification of Italy under Victor Emmanuel, King of the Piedmont. Viva Vittorio Emanuele Re Italia. Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later. Also, philosophy. Philosophical romanticism, writings of G.F.W. Hegel of Prussia, became known as idealism. This idea of mankind's expulsion from Eden was necessary in order for man, both the individual and the species, to mature before returning to paradise. So this idea, again, this idea of suffering is a good thing because it forces us to mature, and I guess it becomes stronger both mentally and physically, before we, I guess you could say, like, have the right to return to paradise. Like, we have to, like, earn our way back, by enduring the world. Sort of. Anyway, there's Beethoven. And I think this one is Franz Liszt. And Weber. Again, one of my favorite pictures, just random dude. Hegel. I don't know why he looks like he just saw, like, a zombie walk by. Okay, I do have some art. This one is this like an Arthurian theme? like Lady of the Lake sort of thing. This was good. Um, this is like the people tossed in the tempest. They've been in a shipwreck and they're crawling out of the ocean as the waves beat against the rocks. Apparently, I showed this back when I first started teaching, and I had a student who had taken, I think, an art appreciation class or like an Art 101 class, and I said something along the lines of like, I'm sure there's a lot of symbolism to this that I don't get. I mean, there's this alone. There's scores of symbolism that I don't fully understand. I mean, the three candles, two of them are not burning and one of them's burning. I'm sure that has meaning beyond what I know. But this alone, my student was like, yeah, that, like, I was like, she's like, I could talk about that for like 15 minutes. But the symbolism here. Like all of this, all of these paintings have lots of symbolism. And even this, which is just like, it looks like a storm, and there's people crawling out of the ocean because there was a shipwreck. But like, there's so much behind these things. This is, I think this was the, because this isn't the French Revolution, this isn't the French flag. What is that flag? Is that Belgium? I don't remember. I don't know what that flag is. I'm not good with all the flags, all the European flags. It's one of the revolutions. More importantly, it's the art. It's the symbolism of like the nation rising from the chaos of the revolution, all the death, and whatnot. And again, the dog's not just there because we all like dogs. The dog is the symbolism for fidelity, for loyalty. This idea that, you know, they're all working together. Usually it's fidelity in like a marriage, but in a scene like this, it's like they're all like this brotherhood working together for this new country that they're forming. This is that other French Revolution, where they're, you know, this is the personification of France, leading them up against like Charles X. Here's a kid freaking dual wielding matchlock pistols. All right, let's go. And, you know, Abraham Lincoln looking guy over here with a shotgun. French art went hard. Oh, yes. I was like, I knew that, speaking of some of my favorite images, I'm so glad we're here. Okay. Utilitarianism, which again, sounds boring. And it's not that exciting, but wait till we get to the images. All right, so this was political economic thought. Thomas Malthus is semi-related. He's in the list, so we're going to mention Malthus. Malthus was a dick. He was an English pastor. He said that the economy was a zero-sum game. So as the population increases exponentially, food stores only increase, I'm never going to be able to say that word properly, arithmetically. If it's on a line graph, exponentially goes up in curves, whereas the other word is just like a line that's a diagonal, and the curve is going to go beyond it. So we're going to run out of food. So nature, or since he's a pastor, God, would remove excess numbers. Basically, he felt like charity or lowering bread prices would hurt everybody. So his answer was, we should let the poor starve. And since he's English, who do you think he is specifically talking about when he's talking about the poor? Well, he he probably means the French, but who would the English have power over to let starve? The Irish. And remember, this is like the 1800s. This is around the time of the potato famine. This was national policy, was to let the Irish starve. Unlike Malthus, we have Jeremy Bentham. He was, and again, this is like the mid-1800s, so this is a very weird time for someone to, quote, be an outspoken atheist. He saw religion as doing more harm than good. The clergy were, quote, opposed to the interests of humanity. He supported women's rights, abortion, prison reform, because remember, prison was where you went to die. The decriminalization of homosexuality, which would not happen for another like 100 plus years. Also, he requested that his body be preserved in a display case rather than buried. He is currently at the University College in London. I have pictures. We also have James and John Stuart Mill. James was a follower of Bentham, and John was James's son. Now, James was important. He did some writings, but we're going to focus on John Stuart Mill. They pushed for political reform based on utilitarian thought. John's ideas were more refined. So James was Bentham's follower, and his son basically took James's ideas and refined them. So John Stuart Mill's ideas are what we're going to focus on. His work on liberty is still used today in political discourse. I mean, look at the name is On Liberty. That is so cool. That's just really good. Yeah. So Malthus, obviously, we're going to talk about him. Bentham, and then make sure, yeah, John Stuart Mill. Sorry, James, we're going to leave you out. So here's Malthus. There's Bentham when he was alive, probably alive. Who knows? Here's Bentham now. I understand you may have questions. That's not his head. That's a wax replica. That's his head. His head fell off. Actually, no, I take it back. He was fascinated with the oceanic people, the people in like Oceania, the southeast islands, and he requested that after he died. I mean, again, he donated his body. This is like a scarecrow. His bones are in there, but it's stuffed with like. One of my students did a paper on Bentham, so I learned that this is like a scarecrow. His bones are in there, but it's like stuffed with straw and stuff. He requested that his head be shrunk. If you've ever seen one of those old, really weird racist movies from like the 50s where it's like, oh, the shrunken heads, and it's like the voodoo doctor with the little like skulls on the thing. Yeah, he wanted his head to be shrunk like they did in the islands. And his lab assistant or friend or whoever promised to do it. So when he died, they took his head and like did it in a vat or whatever, and he screwed it up. So that's what his head looks like now. They put like little glass marbles in his eyes so he's got little eyes now. And then they've got a wax replica of his head on his, to use my students' words, his scarecrow body. And because I'm a horrible person, there's his head up close. Oh, actually, no. So here's this is a display case, right? It's on wheels. And for like, I don't think they do it anymore. It's probably just like in a place where you can go by, walk, and look at it. But for a while, whenever the whatever the utilitarian group became, um, whatever the like club within the University College of London became, um, whenever they would have meetings, they'd roll him in there, and he'd be part of the meeting. I mean, it's classed off, obviously, but like, yeah, they'd roll him in there, and he'd preside over the meeting. Jeremy Bentham, what a guy. I hate that they botched the head shrinking. Anyway, John Stuart Mill, a person. This is actually a quote it's been shortened quite a bit. A person may cause evil to others not only by his actions but by his inaction, and in either case he is justly accountable to them for the injury. In other words, I think it's a quote that I think Winston Churchill uses. For evil men to succeed, good men only need to do nothing, something like that. Basically, this is just a much wordier, because it's the 1800s. Everybody's wordier. All right, on to the Industrial Revolution. We've got plenty of time left. Oh, thanks, Bentham. I needed that. All right. So, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain and gradually made its way across the continent. It was an uneven spread. It would begin in specific towns based on if they had the raw resources and the manpower to accomplish, well, what was necessary. So this was due to a combination of factors that Britain had in spades. Had access to coal fields. Coal just sitting on the surface. They could just scrape it up. It was right there. That's why a lot of the early coal mines are just pits. Like it's not mines. It's pits. They just dug holes and just were digging the coal out. And also where those coal fields were was a lot of people, a lot of workers that were already there. And also in this area was a place where a bunch of rivers and waterways were that powered the water wheels and were used for transportation, for boats and stuff. So it was like this perfect place to start industrializing. Before, coal was used for like fuel for fires occasionally, which other stuff honestly burned better, but coal would burn longer. Honestly, peat was better for fire, but like if you wanted something to burn longer and hotter, it was coal. And thanks to its empire, Britain had a lot of money. As we mentioned with the with Napoleon and the continental system, oh no, we can't trade with Europe. What a shame. We'll just trade with the rest of the world, half of which we own. Yeah, they were fine. They had the world's most stable currency. They were, the pound sterling. That means sterling silver. They were fine. British access to the New World. They had Canada, so lots of raw resources up there. I mean, Canada even today, despite it having quite a few large cities, it's still mostly wilderness. It's still mostly raw resources. It's so much pretty land up there. Because it's cold and nobody wants to live up there. Once you get past like a certain point, it's like, this is just not worth it, y'all. And also it had lots of trade agreements with the U.S. Like right after 1783, when we finished the Revolutionary War, we were like, hey, Britain, can we maybe be trade buddies? And then like right after the War of 1812, with our second war with Britain, like right afterwards, we were like, hey, Britain, sorry about the war. Trade buddies? Like immediately. Because they were the biggest economy in the world, and we knew we should be buddies with the biggest economy in the world. We were back and forth with them in France every now and then because France and England were always fighting each other, and France was also like a big economy, and they were our buddies as well, but we knew who had the money. And also, America had a lot of food. America had a lot of cotton. That's going to come up in here in just a minute. And Britain, due to its size, didn't really need to worry about food production. Because, as I think I might have mentioned to you guys, if I haven't, if Britain was completely cut off from the rest of the world, if they could not bring anything in, they would starve. There is not enough land in Britain to feed the amount of people in Britain. Like, even if they turned all the land that they could into farmland right now, most of the people in Britain would starve because they don't have enough land to support the cities in England. But because of the empire and because of just world trade, they don't really have to worry about it. And also, there was this cultural incentive for the British to make new stuff. There was a free-ish market. There was still, tariffs and some level of control over the market. A relatively fair tax over things. It was fair, kind of high, but relatively speaking, it was fair. I mean, again, the people were making pretty good money. And a lot of skilled tinkerers. A lot of people who had skills that could make stuff. And they were no longer bound by the guilds. So they could use these talents and make stuff for themselves and make stuff for England and make bank off of it. And this led to either good or bad, the Industrial Revolution. And hoo boy, it changed the skyline, that's for sure. So here we have Staffordshire. Oh, that's the only picture I've got? Okay, I've got a lot more pictures of the towns a little bit later, because we go into the towns. So, what was the main thing they focused on in the early Industrial Revolution when it came to, like, making money? What was all their machines making? For those of you that have my American history class, we talked about this in 101, because I said America wasn't allowed to make this because Britain was making it. And this is early Industrial Revolution, so we're not at like trains and stuff yet. This is before like steam engines. We are using American resources for it. Can't remember. It's real simple. Something that everybody needs. That's all right. Textiles. When we think of the Industrial Revolution, we think of locomotives and steamships and big coal-burning factories, but that was later. Early in the Industrial Revolution, it was textiles. It was wool and linen and silk. It was making clothes, because everybody needs clothes. And they, as we're going to see here in a minute, they had a lot of raw resources coming from North America. So between 1760 and 1830, this sped up, especially with cotton, because this came cheaply from the U.S., especially after the cotton gin happened. Because America had a really cheap workforce for some reason. And yeah. So just to quickly go up here. So the thing about wool is strong, it keeps you warm, but it's heavy. If you've ever had something made of wool, it is heavy. I've got a 100% wool blanket from Ireland. That thing's like 30 pounds. And it's not a weighted blanket. It's just heavy. Also, wool is very itchy. Very, very itchy. It's not something you want directly on your skin. But it is very warm. And it's also like fairly waterproof. But when it gets wet, it's even heavier. Linen is made of flax, which is plant fibers. Very easy to make, very cheap, fairly light. Most stuff was made out of linen back then, but not very strong. So it was hard to run it on the machines that they had back then because it would tear. Also, you couldn't wash it too many times before it would simply tear, before it would simply come apart. Which is why they wash their clothes like twice a year. Silk, very strong, very light. Is silk waterproof? Water doesn't bother silk. But it's extremely expensive, especially back then. Silk is so expensive. I mean, even today, silk's pretty expensive. But like back then, it was like it might as well be made out of gold. Yeah, ridiculous in terms of price, but so good, silk. Cotton, strong, soft, lightweight, warm, and you could dye it. You could dye it all sorts of colors. Wool, kind of. Linen, kind of. Silk, not really. Silk did not take dye very well. Cotton, go ahead. Cotton was perfect for pretty much everything. I mean, so yeah. So demand for cotton clothing, or really any kind of cloth, pushed production out of the cottage system and into these big factories. They had these powerful machines powered by steam. Initially, it was by water wheels, which would turn the big cranks and run all the machines, but then eventually they moved to steam engines. Here in America, we kept using the water wheels until like almost 1900. Like we've got so many rivers and waterways and stuff that we just kept using the water wheel. We were late to the game, but also we had so much just natural water sources that we didn't need steam engines until way later. Yeah, the Britain was on top of things. Yeah, as I mentioned, lighter, cheaper, easier to wash and dye. Cotton was as much a part of the early Industrial Revolution as the coal that made the steam engines run was. So, again, when you think of Industrial Revolution, you're like, oh yeah, the big factories and the big, smokestacks with pouring out the coal smoke. Yes, but the machines they were running, the machines that those big furnaces were running, were making clothes out of cotton. Cotton was just as important as the coal. Speaking of, here are those machines. Again, if you've had my American history courses, you've seen these. Because there was not electricity yet, they had these like camshafts up on the ceiling, like a car, and they would run these belts down to the machines, and those belts would turn a shaft on the machine, which would cause the machine to run. Needless to say, you didn't want to be near that belt because that belt was spinning pretty fast. There was no protection of between you and the belt, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Oh, maybe we won't. Yeah, don't touch the belt because it will take your hand, and there was no kind of like, uh, workman's comp. We again, those of you that are in my American history class, we literally just talked about that like last week. Um, yeah, same thing here. We don't go into as much detail here in Europe because we got to kind of move on. So, as early as the early 1700s, England was pushing these gadgets, which was further pushing the Industrial Revolution along. We talk about the Industrial Revolution in America, we were talking about like the 1800s. England was in the Industrial Revolution before the American Revolution happened. Now, you don't need to know these. I'm just showing you a list of all this happening and like how quickly it happened. So 1712, for example, Thomas Newcomen steam engine to pump water out of mines. This was extremely inefficient, but it worked because you were pumping water out of coal mines, and you could just pick the coal up and throw it in the machine to keep the machine running. Because again, the machine wasn't very efficient, but it wasn't like running a train or anything. It was running a pump, pumping water out of a mine that has the fuel in it for the pump. So it's fine. 64, James Hargreaves, a spinning jenny that allowed a worker to spin 8 or more spindles at a time. That's kind of going back to what we see here. We've got all these spindles all running at the same time rather than just running one. So you've got a lot of fabric being made. James Watt, he had a separate condenser that allowed the steam engine to be used for other applications. This was the big step when it came to the steam engine. So the thing with the condenser is, if I had a picture or like a GIF of the steam engine, I'd be able to show you guys better. And for you online people, you're not seeing me filling my arms around. But like the steam engine only had power on, I think, the down thrust, and then when it went back up, it was just wasting energy. But with the condenser, when it went down, it basically built up pressure in the condenser, and then when it went back up, it also would move power, to use a really untechnical term. So James Watt basically made the steam engine useful, to put it simply, which is why we use watts as like a measure of electrical potential, I think. Again, it's been a while since I've had a physics class. Arkwright, he's got this water frame, which it's not what it sounds like. It is a spinning wheel. It's a machine to make thread, but you can hook it up to a water wheel. So it's powered by something other than you kicking the pedal to make it run. But you can only run one spool at a time because you're running off a big freaking water wheel. Samuel Crompton combined this with the spinning jenny. This was another big step. Again, it's iterating on previous ideas. It took 10 years to be able to make this and this into one thing because you had to work out all the different kinks in the system and not just like destroy the whole machine. But this allowed, I should say, this, and then this made it so you didn't even need a water wheel anymore. You had a steam-powered, multiple spool spinning jenny, which again is what makes the thread. So we now have factories, essentially. And then down here, a new method of producing pig iron, which is what was used to make most of the stuff in the early industrial era. So it's pig iron is just a form of iron that's used for industrial applications. It's not the best type of iron, but it's a cheap and easy to make type of iron. We still use pig iron occasionally today. It's not like structural steel, but it works for stuff. Like if you see like, oh, it's a wrought iron fence, it's usually basically pig iron. It's strong enough for what it needs. Also, just to toss in here at the end, Joseph Bramah. He created the hydraulic press, which has two interesting uses. One, it could stamp out iron, so it's a hydraulic press, so it uses water pressure to stamp down things. If you've seen a hydraulic press, it uses hydraulic pressure to stamp out fittings, and apparently it could also be modified to pump water and also pump beer in pubs. Okay. As you can see here, the whole point of this is that technology builds on each other. Steamships led to locomotives because steamships came first, because a locomotive was too rough for, let me take a step back. A steam engine needs to be stable because it's got water in it. That's where the steam comes from. If it tips over, it explodes. The early steamships were all in like rivers and canals. It's flat water, so you can run that without any issues. A locomotive is going to bounce around, even if it's on the flattest, cleanest, best rails you can find. It's going to jostle around. They had to work with steamships first and make the boilers better and more efficient and more stable before they moved on to locomotives, and then eventually like steam liners, like big ocean ships. So by the 1850s, 200,000 Britons were concentrating on new inventions. So we had people all over Britain making stuff. Which again, those of you that were in my American history class, there was a similar explosion of little niche inventions before it got all consolidated. So just a bunch of images. You've got the spinning jenny, which again is just a bunch of little spools on the thing here. That one looks like it's hand crank. That would suck. Usually it's got like a foot crank, a foot pedal rather. If you've ever seen like a clay pottery wheel, usually most of the time they're electric, but if you've seen like one of the old timey ones, it's got like a foot pedal that you move. Is how these often would be. There's the water frame. Again, you just like hook this up to, like we saw with the factory, just like an outside power source, and it moves the spindles. And there is the mule, as he calls it, which again, a lot of spinning parts. I'd be afraid of it. I'll be real. I see a bunch of moving parts going around, I don't like it. I don't even like opening my hood while the car is on. Here is the hydraulic press being used as a firefighter system. So they've got the pump down here, and they're manually moving the lever up and down, and it's pumping the water up and then out through the two hoses. Two of them? Yeah, two hoses. And they're spraying the water out of frame over here, out of like a funnel. This is like a proof of concept. It's not meant to be accurate. But, oh wait, no, sorry. And here's the hydraulic press being used to like press down like iron fittings, which again very important for making machined parts to fit perfectly in with stuff that they're building. Way better than having to be able to like physically mash stuff down. And I love this because this is just, I saw this so much in Ireland. It's a pub, and it's called the Joseph Bramah. They named a pub after the dude who invented the hydraulic press that was also used to pump beer. Like, that's just what these weirdos do, is they, like, name their places after, like, historic people that most people wouldn't know. But in England and Ireland, at least, and I'm sure a lot of other places, they know who you're talking about. Yeah, I know Joseph Bramah is. Like all the stops in Dublin on the DART, the Dublin Area Rapid Transit, the little train, all the stops were like Irish heroes. Every one of them. It's something else. Okay, speaking of trains, railway. Hey, once again, those of you that have my American history class, trains are important. They started in Britain. Railway engine was one of the most pivotal inventions of the Industrial Revolution. Once again, those of you that have my American history class have heard this before. It's not as like the railway is every answer like it was in American history, but yeah. If you lived along a rail line, you had access to cheaper goods, the potential for affordable and relatively safe transportation, because if you're on a train, you're probably not going to get mugged. Now, there is a chance that the rail, because back then the rails weren't made out of iron, they were made out of like wood, sometimes the rail would like pop and shoot through the passenger car and impale it, and that was not good. It was relatively rare. There was also this fear that like going over 35 miles an hour would cause women's uteruses to pop out. I'm not making that up. Yeah. Anyway, trains could carry more cargo more quickly than canals. This is, again, something we saw in America. Like, you know, we had the Erie Canal, which was this massive, you know, windfall for New York. And then railroads came along and was like, hey, we're better in every way. So the growing middle class had access to more stuff. It also had a cultural impact, which, I mean, we don't see as much here, but like in Britain, you take the train everywhere. Hey, I'm going to go, you know, up to the north of England to see my family. We'll take the train. You know, I'm going to go to Wales, take the train. This led to the idea of traveling to the beach for pleasure, just to go hang out, which, again, a lot of people who lived in the middle of England had never seen the beach because you didn't have access to travel back then. You didn't have a car. Cars weren't a thing yet, and the roads were dangerous. The roads that existed, anyway, because there weren't a lot of roads. Businesses and even towns started springing up around train stations. Again, those of you that have my American history class, I've already said this, but for those of you that haven't, supposedly that's where Florence came from. The guy running the train station had a daughter named Florence, and he decided to name the station after his daughter, because each of the stations had a name. And the town that grew up around the station just took the name of the station. Thus, we have Florence. So yeah, businesses and towns grew up around the train stations to take advantage of all the money that the stations made. And as I mentioned again in another class, in the U.S., time zones were developed because train lines stretched all across the U.S. And we had to start like making something of the fact that we're moving so fast across such a vast distance. that like time is becoming a thing that we need to make a point of. I love talking about trains. Okay, speaking of, this was the first train in Britain, the first like major train that was used in Britain. Anybody want to give me a guess on what it was called? It has to do with speed. Any guesses on Britain's first train? What they want to call their first successful steam engine? They called it the Rocket. Any guesses on how fast this thing went? Pretty slow. No. I think it capped at 25. It was closer to about 15. I think it was about 25. But it killed someone on the first day. When it started out of the station, a woman on the platform like freaked out and fell onto the track, and they couldn't get her off the track, and it just like rolled over her. So yeah, the first train was baptized in blood on its first day because it scared a woman so bad when it started, which I mean, I imagine this thing was probably putting out like a lot of smoke and fire and stuff. And she like had a fainting attack and fell in front of it, and they couldn't get it to stop. Yeah, it was a whole thing. Anyway, here it is at work. This isn't just smoke, though. It's like ash and embers. You definitely, if you were first class, you sat inside. If you notice, these are just like regular ass carriages that have just been modified to run the line. There was no such thing as a train car back then. They just modified what they had. If you were lower class, you sat on top, under the ash. That is why these hats were so popular back then, so that the ash would fall on the hat and not your head. And everybody wore black because you might as well. That was why the Victorian fashion was what it was, because everything was covered in ash anyway. You might as well not be able to tell. And also, your hat needed to be tall, so if it caught on fire, you noticed before it got to your head. I love the Victorian era. It's insane. I love time periods that are just utterly mad. How could this stuff have happened? How did we survive? Okay. All right, let's do one more, because I definitely need to save the next one for next time. So, money. So creating new gadgets and even these small factories was relatively cheap early on, which, to say relatively cheap, again, Britain was like one of the richest nations in the world per capita. Probably second only to the Netherlands. Again, the Netherlands was pretty well off, but England had the resources to do all this. But once we were sending railroads everywhere, we had to start doing major investments. Again, just like with the U.S., things started small, but once we had to start doing big stuff, they had to consolidate. So, by 1830, or until 1830, the only place that was stable and sophisticated enough to have the financial system for these investments was Great Britain. So the private investors could and did pour money into these big investment projects. Oh, right. The Dutch Republic was dissolved into the Kingdom of Netherlands, and then the whole split between them and Belgium happened. Right. That's why the Netherlands wasn't involved. Because of stupid people drawing lines on maps. I was wondering. Um, yeah, so thanks to Metternich, um, there are no financial institutions on the continent. Even after the 1860s, the only way to gain this kind of money was through government-backed investment banks. And, as I've mentioned several times in several classes, heck, I think as far back as even like last semester, um, there was an issue of convincing investors to bank on manufacturing. Because up until this point in history, as far back as literally Mesopotamia, and I hate that I use that phrase so often, the traditional form of money, of making money, was land. If you had land, you had money, because you could either farm it and sell your goods for money, or you could rent it out, and the people who had it could make money by farming, and then they would give you some of their money as rent. But manufacturing was different, because you were using land to make stuff, not grow stuff, to make stuff. And you were putting money into, like, businesses, corporations, eventually. And it was difficult to convince investors that this was the way to go. I mean, and even today, like, land still is money. I mean, even most of my family is like, land is money. Like, well, yeah, you're not wrong, but also, it's not the 17th century anymore. Yeah. So this seems like a good place to end, because we will move on to labor next, and that's a lot. So yeah, I'll see y'all on Wednesday. I'm so happy to be in the 1800s in Europe again.